This week is Parshas VaYaytsay, and in it we basically begin the story of Yaakov as the protagonist in the Chumash. He has been introduced in Toldos, and Toldos to a certain extent is a preface where we learn that Yaakov is an honest person, Ish Tam, and Yoshev Ohalim, that he likes to sit and learn. And the basic idea is that he's the man of truth. He's a very honest person. He's a searcher for truth. And the heart of that story is in this week's parsha, where he is dealing with Lavan, his father-in-law, who's basically a crook, wants to take Yaakov for everything that he has. He sees that he's very successful, and the only thing that Lavan wants is money, and he'll go through extreme lengths to try to get everything that he can get out of Yaakov and give him nothing. We've already had the story of Yaakov's encounter with Esav, who tends to be more of the open Russia. The characteristic of Lavan is that he's a hypocrite. That Esav would be a murderer and an adulterer who would do it openly. In the case of Lavan, he always has a believable excuse for whatever he's doing. And the story basically concludes with the death of Rachel in Parshas Vayishlach, and you have what amounts to is a number of case studies. David HaMelech talks about the search for truth and its trials in Psalm Ayin Gimel, Psalm 73, where he says, indeed, God has done good for Israel and for those who are pure of heart, levarei lev. But he says that, in fact, he nearly stumbled because he was jealous of the people who were phonies and the peace of the malevolent people that they had, and they had become fat from their prosperity, they had peace of mind, and he wonders that, says, Ach rik zekiti levavi, he says, perhaps my heart has really gained nothing, and that that it's worthwhile to wash the purity from his hands, be a Russia like them. He says that in the end he saw that he had his doubts until he says, Adavo al mikdash kiel avina lacharisis, until I came to the sanctuary of the Almighty, and I understood what would be their enemies, what would be their end. So that's, shall we say, a capsule of the story of Yaakov, especially in this parsha. Now, the parsha starts where he is fleeing from, or I should say more precisely, he leaves Beersheba, where he's been living with his family, and he is on his way to Haran, which is the home of Lavan, where he is planning to marry one of Lavan's daughters, one of his cousins. And he he happens to come to the house, to the Makom, Hamakom, as it's said in the Chumash, which is the expression for basically the place where the Even Shasi is, the foundation stone, that when God created the world from nothing, that what he created from nothing was foundation stone for the earth, When he created the heavens, he created all sorts of rocks and dust and this, that, and the other thing. And then foundation stone gathered all of these things together. The astronomers are saying the same thing today. And that became Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, Israel, the whole world. And it became a major shrine, going back to Adam, the first man. And when God says to Abraham, take your son to Hamakom, that's what he's talking about. And this is where the temple ultimately will stand. And this is where Yaakov winds up. And when he goes to sleep there, he puts some rocks around his head. Seems like to be a mundane thing to say in the Chumash. So what about this? And Rashi explains it that he put the rocks around his head to protect himself from little creatures that may harm his head. The Sepharda will go into it in more detail, but the idea of the head is important. And the Chumash says, Mereshu Sov. It uses the word head in plural. How many heads does a person have? Well, according to the Kabbalists, a person basically has 3 heads, or shall we say 3 minds, or 3 aspects of the intellect. One of them, the highest of them, is called Keser, Keter, the crown, which surrounds the head. It's also an aspect of a helmet. At times they are used interchangeably. The idea is that the crown is above wisdom and understanding, and it's an aspect of faith. Faith is the idea that what we take to be true, even though we can't prove it, the knowledge that we have learned from books, from teachers, our own experiences, our own observations, support certain conclusions, but they aren't provable. Once they are provable, they go into the realm of reason, and that's sensory. In which case, after that, a person can stretch higher in his belief. But the idea is belief is based on extrapolation. I believe it to be true. And this is basically where religion lies. The idea that it's better to be honest than a crook. Very often you can't prove it, but you learn it you see it in the sacred books. You learn it in your schools. You see it with your own eyes, but you can't always say that it's a cause and effect relationship. And the idea is that the path that Yaakov is going on is an exploration of truth. And part of knowing truth and loving truth is to hate sheker, to hate falsehood, hate lies, and to know just what they are. And included in that is the idea that there's often a price to pay for truth. And at times, lies may seem to work quite well. A con man may get a lot of money, as an example, and he may become a billionaire. It's all a lie, but he's got the money. The problem is, and this is the concept of the rocks around the head, why it's important to the Chumash, is that a person has to be concerned about the things that they believe in, the tests of morality that they have. The Seforno explains Yaakov's prayer that he should have protection, especially after God has offered it to him, has told him that he will have it. He says that he shouldn't violate any of his own principles or the principles that have been established by his Creator. That the idea is that when he is very poor, because at times the truth is not profitable, and he has a lot of enemies who seem to be very powerful, that he shouldn't say, it's better to be like them. And it's not a case where he'll say, I've investigated truth, and I've investigated sheker, and sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Sometimes you have to be a Russia in this world. It's not a case where he actually believes that. If he believes it, then what happens is, and this is part of the theme of the Parsha, is then it's appropriate to do things that may not be true, or may not seem to be true, or have a surface amount of lies in them, or false in them, which is a major issue. Getting to a deeper truth, you get the machlokas between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, where do you say that the bride is beautiful at her wedding, even if she's very ugly? And the conclusion is that you do. That this is not the time to make an examination and a public evaluation of her personality. The issue is that you want to celebrate, therefore you say the things that are appropriate for celebrating, even though there may be certain inconsistencies between them and reality. The reality is that it's a celebration. That's the basic idea. But nevertheless, when a person is under pressure, they may violate things that they really know are true and go on a bad path because of it. That's what Yaakov is concerned about. That's what David HaMelech is concerned about. That a person will go with an illusion because it's convenient at the time and they're under pressure. Essentially, what you had with Lavan is that Yaakov, who is lovesick over Rachel, says that he'll work for Lavan for 7 years for her hand in marriage. Obviously, an absurd point of view. If Lavan was a decent in person, he would say, look, I'm happy to have your labor, but why don't you marry her sometime earlier than that? Lavan sees that he can get some money out of it, so what does he do? He gives, after 7 years, he gives Yaakov Leah, and he says, marry Rachel next week, but I'll trust you to work for the 7 years. In addition to that, you have the issue of the deal that they make, where Yaakov basically says he'll take spotted and streaked sheep as his pay. The idea that it's he's taking damaged merchandise. You want your sheep to be all white, all black, okay? Easier to shear it that way. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Yaakov a trick so that the better sheep will be the ones that are spotted and striped. And it happens that Lavan, when he starts seeing that even though he's still making a lot of money and far more than he would make on his own, gets very jealous and drives and basically gets angry at Yaakov or hostile. And Yaakov then basically slips away. And Lavan chases after him, and God appears to Lavan and says, do not say anything. Be careful with what you say to Yaakov, whether it's good or bad. Essentially, the idea is you don't. Hakadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to have anything to do with Lavan. He doesn't want his honey, and he doesn't want his sting. That's the idea. The idea, so to speak, God is signing off on these tricks. The basic idea is that that truth and falsity are complex and multifaceted, and at times they may seem very similar, and at times what is true seems to be false, and what is false seems to be true. And it's basically the mission of Yaakov, and to a certain extent the mission of Jewish people, to make that, to hold a light to that, to see, what really is in essence true. That when you're dealing with a crook, you sometimes have to be sneaky to protect yourself. That's the basic idea. Or you have to be slick. That you just basically cannot be truthful in your tongue, but false in the results. Okay, what happens with Yaakov, after he gets the prophecy from Hashem, he takes the rocks that he has and he anoints them with oil. He makes a pillar out of them and anoints them with oil. The idea of anointing is showing that it's important. It's just an expression of showing that something's important. Today we would have different ways of doing it, putting a decoration on it of some sort. He says that this pillar is going to be ultimately the place of the temple, and that is the mission of the Jewish people during this period of exile, that ultimately they are supposed to be the ones who are examining what is true and what is false, and ultimately to build the house of absolute truth. May it come speedily and in our days.